The cavern was damp, the air thick with the scent of minerals and something older, something untouched by time. Ethan Voss pressed his palm against his ribs, wincing at the deep gash beneath his torn shirt. His breath was ragged, his vision blurred at the edges, but he had made it. Barely. He stumbled further inside, away from the howling wind and the shrieking creature still hunting him outside. The thing had been relentless, its elongated limbs and serrated mandibles moving too fast, too precise for a simple predator. No, this was something else, something engineered. And his team had woken it up. His pulse hammered as he leaned against the smooth rock wall, sliding down until he sat, legs stretched out in front of him. The wound needed tending, but his medical kit had been lost during the chase. He cursed under his breath, tilting his head back, exhaling sharply. Then he heard it, a whisper of movement too fluid, too intentional to be a trick of the wind. Ethan tensed. He wasn't alone. He turned his head just as she emerged from the shadows, tall, ethereal, utterly alien. She moved with a grace that made the air itself seem to part around her, silver-blue hair shifting as if caught in a current, though there was no breeze. Bioluminescent markings pulsed softly along her arms, the glow intensifying as her eyes met his, deep violet, shifting to cyan in an instant. A weapon was in her hand before he could react, a blade unlike any he had seen before. It gleamed, reflecting the ambient glow of the cavern's crystalline formations. He didn't move, couldn't, not with the way her gaze locked onto him, calculating, assessing. Then her nostrils flared. "You are injured," she said, her voice lilting but firm. Ethan's fingers twitched against the wound. "Yeah, well, running for your life will do that." She tilted her head, watching him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "You are human. Last I checked." A pause. Then, to his surprise, she sheathed her weapon, kneeling beside him. Ethan swallowed hard. Up close, she was unlike anything he had studied in exobiology reports. Her skin, pale with an opalescent sheen, was marked with delicate patterns of light that seemed to shift in response to his presence. Her fingers hovered over his wound, and for a moment he thought she might strike. Instead, she pressed her palm lightly against his ribs. His body seized. A warmth spread through him, a tingling sensation that was neither painful nor entirely pleasant. He felt his skin knit itself together beneath her touch, the pain receding like a tide pulling away from the shore. His breath hitched as he looked down, watching as the deep gash sealed, leaving only a faint scar. He stared. "What the?" She withdrew her hand, standing fluidly as if gravity was an afterthought. "You would have bled out within the hour," she stated matter-of-factly. "That would have been inconvenient." Ethan blinked. "Inconvenient," she didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back, arms crossing over her chest as she regarded him with something close to dissatisfaction. "You are with the ones who stole the key." It wasn't a question. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the lingering ache in his muscles. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her bioluminescence flickered. He wasn't sure what that meant, but it felt like skepticism. "The artifact your people took," she clarified. "It was never meant to leave this world. Now the Guardian has awakened." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had suspected as much. The ancient structures they had explored, the energy signatures, they had all pointed to something big, something dormant. But the lead researchers had dismissed the risks, and now they were gone. His team was either dead or scattered, and he was stranded with an alien who clearly had her own agenda. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Look, I didn't take anything. I was just here to study the biological systems. I didn't sign up for." A low tremor shook the cavern, cutting him off. Dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance, a deep, mechanical growl echoed through the tunnels. Her gaze snapped toward the sound. "It has found us." Ethan didn't need to ask what it was. The thing that had chased him, the thing that had killed his team, it wasn't a natural predator. It was part of the planet itself, part of whatever ancient defense system had been activated when the artifact was removed. She turned to him, eyes sharp. "You can still move?" "Yeah." "Then we must go." Ethan barely had time to nod before she grabbed his wrist and pulled him into the darkness. The cavern walls blurred past as they ran, their footfalls echoing through the winding passageways. Ethan's breath came in sharp gasps, his body still reeling from the recent healing. His mind struggled to keep pace with the reality of his situation, stranded on an alien world, hunted by a sentient defense system, and now fleeing with a bioluminescent warrior who had, just minutes ago, considered him an enemy. Behind them, the deep, mechanical growl reverberated again, closer this time. The thing was gaining on them. Ethan risked a glance over his shoulder. A massive shadow moved through the passage, its glowing red eyes illuminating the rock walls in an eerie pulse. The creature's elongated limbs scraped against the cavern's surfaces, its body an unsettling fusion of organic muscle and alien machinery. It moved with a chilling precision, its segmented torso twisting unnaturally to navigate the narrow corridors. He turned back just in time to see the tunnel ahead break into a sheer drop. "Problem," he managed. "I see it," Sari'ka replied. She didn't slow. Instead, she tightened her grip on his wrist and leapt, pulling him with her. Ethan barely had time to react before they plunged downward. Wind rushed past him as they fell into the abyss, weightless for a few terrifying seconds before landing on a sloped surface. Sari adjusted instantly, her movements fluid, but Ethan's body slammed hard against the incline, rolling down in an uncontrolled spiral. Pain shot through him as he collided with the rocky ground at the bottom. He groaned, pushing himself up on shaking arms. Sari landed beside him, unfazed. "You are slow." "Not all of us have gravity-defying alien legs," Ethan muttered, coughing. Her bioluminescent markings flickered again. He was starting to think it was amusement. A screech from above shattered the moment. The creature had reached the edge of the drop. It peered down at them, assessing. Then it leapt. Ethan's stomach lurched. "Move." Sari was already in motion, dragging him into another tunnel just as the creature crashed behind them, sending a shockwave of dust and debris through the cavern. The passage they entered was tighter, forcing them to run single file. Ethan's mind raced, searching for options. "Tell me there's a way out of here." "There is," she said without hesitation. "If we reach the temple's core, I can deactivate the Guardian." "Great," Ethan huffed. "And you didn't mention that earlier because you would have slowed me down." He scowled but didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. The tunnel opened up into a vast underground chamber. Jagged, luminescent crystals jutted from the ground and ceiling, casting an ethereal blue glow over the space. In the center stood a towering structure, clearly artificial, its walls marked with intricate glyphs that pulsed faintly. Sari's pace quickened. "We are close." Ethan followed, eyes darting to the strange inscriptions. His brain cataloged them automatically, recognizing patterns, but there was no time to study them, not with the thunderous sound of pursuit behind them. They reached the entrance of the temple, but as Sari stepped forward, the air shimmered. A translucent barrier flared to life, barring their path. She hissed, stepping back. "Of course," Ethan muttered, "because running for our lives wasn't enough of a challenge." Sari turned to him, expression sharp. "You are the scientist. Disable it." Ethan blinked. "Oh, sure. Let me just magically hack an ancient alien security system I've never seen before." She arched an elegant brow. "You said you studied biological systems. This temple is alive." He opened his mouth, then shut it. His eyes darted to the glyphs again. The pulsing, it was rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Realization dawned. He stepped forward, pressing his palm against the nearest set of markings. The energy barrier flickered in response. His fingers traced the symbols, feeling the faint warmth beneath his touch. "This isn't a lock," he murmured. "It's a pulse reader." He focused, adjusting the pressure of his touch to match the pulsing frequency. Slowly, the energy shifted. The barrier shimmered, then dissolved. Sari nodded approvingly. Not useless after all. High praise, Ethan muttered, stepping inside. They didn't get far before the guardian shrieked behind them. The chamber trembled as the creature forced its way through, its segmented body contorting unnaturally to fit into the passage. Sari's posture tensed. Go, I will hold it off. Ethan turned to her, incredulous. Hold it off. That thing is a walking nightmare made of murder, her eyes locked onto his, steady and unyielding. I am not weak. I never said you were, he shot back. But you're not invincible either. She hesitated, just for a moment. But it was enough. The guardian lunged. Ethan grabbed Sari's wrist and yanked her through the temple doors just as the structure sealed itself behind them. The creature slammed into the barrier, screeching in frustration. Ethan exhaled shakily. That was too close. Sari studied him for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. Then, to his utter confusion, she let out a soft hum, low, melodic. What was that? He asked. Her markings pulsed faintly. Your species is perplexing. Ethan huffed a laugh. Yeah, well, the feeling's mutual. For the first time she smiled, just barely. But it was there. And somehow, despite the imminent danger, Ethan felt something shift between them. Something neither of them had expected. The silence inside the temple was suffocating. The thick stone walls dampened the creature's furious screeches outside, but the distant tremors told Ethan it hadn't given up. It was only a matter of time before it found another way in. He turned, surveying the massive chamber before them. The walls pulsed faintly, as though the entire structure was breathing. The air was thick with energy, an electric charge that made the hair on his arms stand on end. Towering pillars lined the room, leading up to a massive altar-like construct in the center. Sari moved with quiet purpose, stepping toward the altar. Ethan followed, his mind racing. You said you could deactivate the Guardian, he said. How? Sari placed a hand on the structure, her fingertips glowing as they made contact. The glyphs on its surface brightened in response. The key your people stole was meant to fit here, she explained. It is a control mechanism. Without it, the temple is in defense mode, treating all outsiders as invaders. Ethan exhaled sharply. Great. So unless we get the key back, we're stuck inside an ancient kill switch with a homicidal security system waiting outside. She nodded. Fantastic, he muttered. Sari glanced at him, her bioluminescence flickering in amusement. Your frustration does not change the situation. Yeah, well, sarcasm helps me cope, Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. So what happens if we activate this thing without the key? Sari hesitated. That wasn't a good sign. The temple may recognize a compatible energy signature, she admitted, but it would be dangerous. Ethan sighed. Why am I not surprised? She turned fully toward him then, her violet eyes assessing. You are a scientist. You understand biological systems. If the temple is alive, then perhaps you can mimic the key's frequency. He frowned. That's a hell of a long shot. You have better odds than I do, she said simply. Ethan rubbed at his temples. He'd spent years studying alien physiology, but this was something else entirely. Still, she wasn't wrong. If the temple responded to organic energy, there was a chance, however slim, that he could trick it into recognizing him as an authorized user. All right, he muttered. Let's give it a shot. Sari stepped aside, allowing him access to the altar. Ethan placed his hands on the cool stone surface, trying to feel for the rhythmic pulse he had detected before. It was subtle, buried beneath the layers of ancient tech, but it was there. He closed his eyes, syncing his breathing to the temple's hum. He focused, willing his own bioelectrical energy to match the pattern. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the altar reacted. A sharp, resonating chime filled the chamber, and the glyphs flared to life beneath Ethan's hands. His pulse quickened as the energy crackled along his skin, jolting through him like static electricity. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain still. Sari watched intently, her posture rigid. "It is working." Ethan barely heard her. The temple's pulse was growing stronger, flooding his senses, tugging at something deep in his mind. It was overwhelming, but he held his ground, pushing against the current. Then the resonance changed. The temple saw him. A flood of images burst through his mind, flashes of the world as it had been centuries ago, before the AI defenses, before the war that had left the planet scarred. He saw the beings who had once ruled here, their luminous forms moving through structures like this one. He saw the creation of the Guardians, the last desperate attempt to protect what was left, and he saw the warning. His eyes snapped open. "Sorry," he rasped. "This isn't just a defense system, it's a reset switch." She tensed. "Explain." Ethan pulled his hands back, shaking, his skin still tingling from the connection. "The key your people were after, it doesn't just deactivate the Guardian, it reboots the entire ecosystem. The AI was designed to wipe out anything deemed an invasive species and start over." Sari's expression darkened. "Including my people." Ethan nodded grimly. "If your leaders were planning to use it, they might be about to trigger a full planetary reset." The weight of the realization settled between them. Sari's bioluminescence flickered wildly, her hands clenching at her sides. "They do not know. They believe it is a weapon to purge outsiders. They would never expect it to turn against them. Then we need to stop them," Ethan said. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "The key is already en route to the command ship. My people will activate it once they are clear of the surface." Ethan rubbed at his jaw. "Which means we need to get off this planet. Fast." Sari glanced toward the sealed entrance. "The Guardian will not let us leave easily." Ethan followed her gaze, then looked back at the altar. A thought formed, wild, reckless, but possibly their only chance. What if we use the temple's energy against it? Sari narrowed her eyes. "Explain." Ethan gestured at the structure. "This place is linked to the AI, right? If I can send a disruption signal through the system, we might be able to force a temporary shutdown." She considered his words. "A dangerous gamble." "Got a better idea," a beat of silence. Then finally she shook her head. "All right," Ethan exhaled. "Let's do this." He placed his hands back on the altar, bracing for the surge of energy. The moment his skin made contact, the temple responded, its glyphs pulsing erratically. Sari positioned herself near the entrance, blade at the ready, her bioluminescence glowing fiercely. "Now, Ethan," she urged. Ethan focused, pushing his energy into the system. The pulse grew erratic, the temple shuddering around them. Outside, the Guardian screeched. Then, as if struck by an invisible force, it collapsed. Ethan gasped, pulling away from the altar just as the energy receded. The silence that followed was deafening. Sari turned, studying the fallen Guardian beyond the threshold. After a tense moment, she exhaled. "It is down." Ethan grinned weakly. "Told you I could do it." Sari approached him, her gaze softer than before. "You continue to surprise me, Ethan Voss." Something about the way she said his name sent an unexpected warmth through him. Before he could respond, she extended a hand. "Come, we have a planet to save." Ethan clasped her hand, and for the first time he felt something other than fear or desperation. He felt the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Ethan's grip tightened around Sari's hand as they moved through the temple's now silent corridors. The Guardian remained motionless behind them, its red-lit optics flickering before going dark entirely. The pulse of the temple had shifted. It was weaker now, unsteady, like a heart struggling to beat after being shocked. He had no idea how long the disruption would last. They needed to move. Outside the temple, the air was thick with humidity, the bioluminescent flora pulsing in erratic patterns, disturbed by the temple's momentary reset. The jungle beyond was alive with distant, guttural sounds, creatures shifting in the darkness, reacting to the sudden absence of their mechanical overlord. Ethan's mind raced through their next steps. "We need a ship," he said, scanning the sky. The atmosphere above was clouded in deep indigo swirls, but faint metallic glimmers marked the presence of Sari's people's fleet, waiting, ready to activate the key. "My dropship is 2 kilometers north," Sari responded, moving with quick, precise steps. "If we can reach it, we can intercept the command ship before the reset begins," Ethan sighed. 2 kilometers through a jungle that tried to kill me earlier. Great. Sari shot him a glance, a flicker of amusement in her bioluminescent markings. "You have survived this long. Try to keep up." He let out a dry chuckle, but his body was already pushing forward, adrenaline dulling the ache in his limbs. They moved swiftly, weaving between thick, vine-covered structures and luminescent fungi that pulsed under their steps. The terrain was uneven, and the distant sounds of shifting undergrowth told Ethan that the planet's ecosystem was still adjusting to the sudden power shift. He could feel the air vibrate with tension, as though the world itself knew something unnatural was about to happen. As they ran, his thoughts drifted. He had come to this planet as a researcher, not a fighter. He had spent his career studying alien life, but none of his training had prepared him for this, for being hunted, for standing between an entire species and extinction, and certainly not for her. Sari moved ahead of him, her form illuminated by the soft glow of her markings, her silver-blue hair shifting like liquid with each step. He had never encountered anything like her, not just in biology but in presence. She was sharp, quick-witted, and unreadable, yet there was something else beneath her cool exterior, something restless, something familiar. His mind snapped back to the present as Sari abruptly halted, signaling for him to stop. They had reached a clearing, and in the center sat the sleek form of her dropship, intact but surrounded. Ethan sucked in a sharp breath. 4 figures stood near the ship, their bodies draped in armor that reflected the jungle's bioluminescence. Their faces were concealed behind smooth, iridescent visors, but even from a distance, Ethan could feel their tension. They were waiting. Sari's jaw tightened. "They know," Ethan swore under his breath. "Yeah, they definitely know." Sari scanned the clearing. "We must approach carefully. If they believe I am compromised, they'll try to kill us," Ethan finished grimly. She didn't deny it. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. "All right. Plan?" Sari's bioluminescence flickered in patterns too quick for him to interpret. Then she turned to him with a look he was starting to recognize as calculated risk. "We surrender." Ethan blinked. "Excuse me." Sari's expression remained unreadable. "They will not execute us immediately. They will want to interrogate me. That will give us an opening." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his messy hair. "This is a terrible idea." She tilted her head slightly, watching him. "You trust me?" He hesitated, feeling the weight of her gaze. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yeah, I do." Her lips parted slightly at his answer, but she said nothing. Instead, she straightened, took a breath, and stepped forward into the clearing. Ethan followed. The moment they emerged from the jungle, the guards turned sharply, weapons raised. One of them stepped forward, their voice smooth and sharp like polished glass. "Sari'ka," they addressed, ignoring Ethan entirely. "You were expected hours ago." Sari remained composed. "I was delayed." The guard's helmet tilted slightly. "And the human?" "He is with me," she stated evenly. A pause. Then, slowly, the guards lowered their weapons. The leader gestured toward the dropship. "The commander will want to speak with you." Sari inclined her head. "Of course." Ethan held his breath as they were escorted onto the ship. The moment they stepped inside, the doors sealed shut, the hum of engines activating beneath them. They were no longer on the planet's surface. They were headed straight to the command ship, straight into the heart of the storm. The ship's interior was sleek and minimalistic, its walls pulsing with the same faint bioluminescence that flickered along Sari's skin. Ethan kept his breathing steady, masking the anxiety twisting in his gut. He had stepped into a lot of unknowns in his career, but this was something else. He was now a prisoner, or at least acting like one, on an alien warship, alongside an alien warrior who only hours ago might have considered him an enemy. The guards led them down a long corridor, the air thick with unspoken tension. The gravity on the ship was slightly heavier than the planet's surface, making each step feel just a fraction slower, each breath a little deeper. Ethan forced himself to stay relaxed, to move as though he belonged here. Sari walked beside him, her posture rigid but composed. The soft glow of her markings had dimmed, something he was starting to recognize as a controlled suppression of emotion. She wasn't showing weakness. She was calculating. The lead guard stopped at a set of towering doors. "The commander will see you now," they stated, stepping aside. Sari moved first, giving Ethan the briefest glance before leading him into the chamber beyond. The room was vast, high ceilings arching overhead, the walls lined with shifting displays of information in a language Ethan couldn't read. In the center stood a figure, taller than Sari, broader, their armor more elaborate. The bioluminescent patterns on their skin pulsed in slow, deliberate waves. Their presence alone carried authority, and Ethan knew without a doubt this was the commander. The doors sealed behind them. Sari stepped forward, bowing her head slightly. "Commander Voss." Voss's gaze swept over her before settling on Ethan. Their expression remained impassive, but there was no mistaking the sharp scrutiny in their glowing eyes. "You bring a human to my ship." The words were slow, deliberate. Sari's voice remained steady. "He is not like the others." Voss tilted their head slightly. "And yet he was with them when they stole the key." Ethan swallowed but held his ground. "I didn't steal anything. I was studying the planet. Your people woke something up when they took the artifact, and now it's trying to wipe out everything, including you." Voss's gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Sari pressed forward. "The temple was never meant to be used as a weapon against invaders. It is a reset mechanism. If the key is activated, it will not just eliminate foreign threats. It will purge the entire world, including our own." A heavy silence followed. Then Voss's bioluminescence flickered in short pulses. "Consideration." "You are certain?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "I saw it. The temple showed me." Voss's expression darkened. "And you expect me to believe the word of a human?" Sari straightened. "Believe me." Another silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Voss's stance shifted. "The key is already in transit to the core vessel," they said. "Once it arrives, it will be activated." Ethan's stomach clenched. "How long?" Voss exhaled. "Less than an hour." Ethan exchanged a glance with Sari. That wasn't enough time to convince an entire fleet to abort the mission. They needed to act now. Sari squared her shoulders. "Then we stop it ourselves." Voss's bioluminescence flared in alarm. "You would defy your own kind for him." Sari didn't hesitate. "For the truth." For a long moment, Voss said nothing. Then, without a word, they turned, activating a control panel embedded in the wall. The ship trembled slightly as a new course was locked in. "I will not openly defy the High Council," Voss said, "but I will not stand in your way." Ethan exhaled, his pulse still hammering. "That's the best offer we're getting, isn't it?" Sari gave the smallest nod. "It is enough." Ethan turned back to Voss. "Then we have work to do." The ship lurched forward, cutting through the void of space. They were heading straight for the core vessel. The final battle had already begun. The moment the ship docked with the core vessel, everything became a blur of motion. Ethan followed Sari through the airlock, his pulse hammering as they stepped onto the colossal warship. The corridors here were wider, the air charged with an unsettling stillness. This wasn't just a military vessel. It was a throne of power, the place where decisions that could reshape entire worlds were made. and right now they were on the brink of catastrophe. Sari moved with unwavering precision, her focus locked ahead. Ethan kept close, resisting the urge to fidget under the watchful gazes of the guards stationed along the hallways. Unlike the ones on Versh's ship, these soldiers didn't lower their weapons. "We're going to have company," Ethan murmured. Sari's voice remained low but firm. "Let them come. We will not be here long." They approached a towering doorway flanked by two elite guards, their armor adorned with glowing insignias that marked them as high-ranking officers. One of them lifted a hand, halting their approach. "Sari'ka," the guard addressed, voice sharp with authority. "Your presence was not requested." Sari did not waver. "I must speak with the High Council. It is urgent." The second guard's bioluminescence flickered in a pattern Ethan couldn't decipher, but he recognized the edge in their stance: tension. "The Council is preparing for the activation," the first guard stated. "They are not to be disturbed." Sari's jaw clenched. "Then they walk into disaster blind." Ethan resisted the urge to step forward. He knew his presence alone was already a problem. Pushing his luck would only make things worse. The guards exchanged a glance. Then the first one turned, activating the doors with a sharp command. "They will hear you, but speak wisely." The doors parted, revealing the chamber beyond. Ethan followed Sari inside, and immediately he felt the weight of the room press down on him. The High Council sat upon elevated platforms, their forms bathed in the ambient glow of their species' natural luminescence. Their expressions were unreadable, their gazes sharp. The air vibrated with authority, a silent reminder that they held absolute power here. At the center of the room, suspended in a shimmering energy field, was the key. It was smaller than Ethan expected, sleek, crystalline, glowing with a pulsing golden light. But despite its elegant form, he knew it carried the power to reset an entire world. A figure at the head of the council chamber leaned forward, their eyes narrowing as they studied Sari. "You return," the elder stated, voice slow and deliberate, "and you bring a human." Murmurs rippled through the council. Ethan felt every set of eyes lock onto him, dissecting him like an insect under a microscope. Sari remained unfazed. "I bring the truth." A pause. Then the elder gestured subtly, granting her permission to continue. "The key is not what we believed," Sari said, voice steady but urgent. "It does not purge invaders, it will purge everything." A wave of shifting bioluminescence spread through the council. The elder's expression did not change. "You claim knowledge beyond that of our scholars. What proof do you offer?" Sari turned to Ethan. He inhaled deeply, then stepped forward. "I saw it," he said. "The temple showed me. The reset doesn't distinguish between threats. It wipes the entire ecosystem clean." One of the council members scoffed. "And we are to trust the word of a human." Ethan clenched his jaw. "I don't care if you trust me, trust the data." "Your own people triggered the Guardian. It wasn't an attack, it was a response. The moment you activate that key, the system won't just eliminate outsiders. It will turn against everything." Another murmur spread through the chamber, uncertainty creeping into the once unshaken confidence of the council. The elder watched Ethan for a long, unnerving moment. Then they turned back to Sari. "You betray your mission, your duty." Sari's bioluminescence pulsed in sharp, defiant waves. "My duty is to my people. I will not let them walk willingly into annihilation." The room fell into silence. Then slowly the elder rose to their full height. "You have always been different, Sari'ka," they said, "curious, reckless." Their gaze flickered to Ethan before settling back on her. "And now, compromised." Ethan's stomach dropped. That wasn't good. Sari's stance remained firm. "I speak the truth," the elder exhaled, "and for that you will be detained." The words had barely settled in the air before the guards moved. Ethan barely had time to react before two soldiers seized his arms, another two moving toward Sari. She resisted instantly, her movements sharp and fluid, but there were too many. Ethan struggled, his heart hammering, but the guards were stronger, faster. "Stop!" He shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the sharp command of the elder. "The activation will proceed," they stated coldly. "Take them away." Ethan's mind spun as he was dragged backward, his breath shallow with the realization they had failed. The key was about to be activated, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Ethan struggled against the guards, but their grip was unyielding, their strength far beyond his own. He caught a glimpse of Sari a few feet away, similarly restrained. Her body was tense, but she wasn't fighting, not yet. She was waiting, calculating. The council elder turned away from them, gesturing toward the floating key. The energy surrounding it intensified, its golden light pulsing in slow, deliberate waves. Ethan's stomach twisted. "They're actually going to do it." "You're making a mistake," he growled, his voice rough. The elder barely spared him a glance. "The mistakes were made long before you arrived, human." They turned to the gathered council members. "It is time. The key will return balance to our world." A shift of energy rippled through the chamber as one of the council members stepped forward, their hands raised toward the artifact. Ethan's heart pounded. "Sorry, we have to." The moment he spoke, she moved. With a sudden burst of strength, she twisted her arms, snapping free from the guard's grip with a sharp, fluid motion. Before they could react, she lunged toward the nearest one, striking with a precision that sent them sprawling. Ethan barely had time to react before the hands holding him faltered, their attention diverted by Sari's sudden rebellion. He used the opportunity, twisting sharply, yanking himself free from their grip. He turned just in time to see Sari leap toward the key. She was fast, faster than any human, but the council wasn't unprepared. The elder flicked a hand and a pulse of energy shot through the chamber. The force struck Sari midair, sending her crashing to the floor with a sharp gasp of pain. The guards surged toward her, weapons raised. Ethan didn't think. He moved. Charging forward, he threw himself in front of her just as the guards reached them. A stun weapon crackled against his shoulder, sending searing pain through his nerves, but he gritted his teeth and remained standing. The elder's expression was unreadable. "You would die for her," Ethan swallowed hard, chest heaving. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I would." Silence. Sari pushed herself up, her breath sharp, and Ethan caught the flicker of something in her bioluminescence, something that felt like surprise. Then, without warning, the room trembled. The golden glow of the key flickered, then pulsed erratically. A sudden chime filled the chamber, low, resonant, vibrating through the very walls. The council members exchanged glances, their bioluminescence flaring in uncertainty. The elder turned sharply toward the artifact. "What is happening?" Ethan felt it before he understood it, a change, a shift in the energy around them, something wrong. Then he saw the glyphs along the chamber walls begin to flicker, and he knew the system had been watching, listening, and now it had decided. The temple's AI wasn't waiting for the key to be activated. It was triggering the reset now. The elder's gaze snapped toward Ethan and Sari. "What have you done?" Sari rose fully to her feet, her expression sharp. "This was never ours to control." The ground beneath them trembled, and suddenly the chamber was bathed in red warning lights. Symbols Ethan couldn't read flashed in rapid succession across the walls, alarms blaring through the massive ship. A voice, smooth, mechanical, resonated through the chamber, speaking in Sari's language. Ethan didn't need a translator to understand what it meant. The reset had begun. Panic rippled through the council. The elder turned, issuing sharp commands, but Ethan knew there was no stopping this, not unless they got to the source. He grabbed Sari's wrist. "We need to shut it down." She nodded, her expression grim. The council was in chaos now. Soldiers and officials scrambling to understand what was happening, shouting over one another as the ship's systems responded to the unfolding disaster. No one stopped them as they ran. They sprinted through the corridors, moving against the tide of fleeing personnel. The ship trembled beneath their feet as if the very fabric of reality was shifting. "The control center," Sari panted. "If we sever the link before the final command is sent, we can stop it." Ethan wasn't sure if he believed it, but they had no other choice. They reached the doors of the control chamber, but before they could enter, the ship lurched. The force of the movement sent them both crashing to the ground. Ethan groaned, pushing himself up just in time to see a massive view screen flicker to life. And then, the planet began to change. From the ship's vantage point, he could see it. The swirling storms in the upper atmosphere, the shifting of entire land masses. The ecosystem was already responding to the reset command, as if preparing to wipe the slate clean. They were almost out of time. Ethan forced himself forward, shoving against the heavy door controls. The mechanisms resisted for a moment before releasing with a hiss, granting them entry. The control room was dark except for the central interface, a massive construct of intertwining energy streams flowing together in synchronized patterns, and at its heart, the final command sequence. Sari moved immediately, her hands pressing against the interface, her bioluminescence flaring as she tried to override the sequence. Ethan stood beside her, his mind scrambling to process the alien technology. "This is beyond anything I've ever seen," he admitted. "How do we stop it?" Sari's expression was strained. "The system is not designed for cancellation," Ethan inhaled sharply. "Then we need to trick it." His gaze scanned the control matrix, searching for an opening, a flaw, anything they could manipulate. His fingers hovered over the interface, and for a brief moment he hesitated. What if I fail again? The thought was bitter, cold, clawing at the edges of his mind. Then he felt Sari's gaze on him. "You are not the man you once were," she said softly. Ethan exhaled, and then he moved. His fingers danced across the interface, searching for the same pulse, the same rhythm he had felt in the temple. If the AI recognized organic patterns, then maybe, there, a break in the sequence. Ethan pressed his palm flat against the control matrix, pushing his bioelectrical field into the system. The interface reacted. Energy surged around him, wrapping him in light, data, and memory. The AI saw him. It recognized him. It hesitated. Sari's voice cut through the storm of information. "Now, Ethan," he focused, redirected the command, shifting the target of the reset from the planet to the system itself. A failsafe. A loop. The AI flared with resistance, then collapsed. The ship rocked violently, alarms shrieking. Ethan gasped, his vision dimming as the energy dissipated. Then silence. The red lights faded. The hum of the system dimmed to nothing. Sari released a slow breath. Ethan blinked, his body swaying. "Did it work?" Sari placed a hand against the interface. After a long pause, her eyes met his. "Yes," she murmured. Relief crashed over him like a tidal wave. He exhaled a laugh, staggering back. Sari caught his arm, steadying him. For a moment they just stood there, the weight of everything pressing against them. Then, slowly, Sari's fingers curled around his wrist. Ethan met her gaze, and in that moment, after everything, they weren't just scientist and warrior. They were something more, the future, uncertain. But together, Ethan's pulse was still racing as the tension in the air began to dissipate. The ship, which had trembled under the weight of impending disaster, now felt eerily still. The alarms had faded, the glowing glyphs on the walls returning to a neutral pulse. The AI had accepted the override. The reset was no longer targeting the planet. It was over. Sari remained still beside him, her fingers still lightly wrapped around his wrist. Her bioluminescence flickered erratically, as if her body had yet to decide what emotion to settle on. Relief, shock, something deeper. Ethan let out a slow breath, forcing his legs to hold steady. "That was reckless," she finished for him, though there was no reprimand in her tone. Only quiet acknowledgement. He chuckled, rubbing his temple. Yeah, but it worked. Sari studied him for a long moment, her iridescent gaze unreadable. Then, without a word, she released his wrist and turned to the control panel. "We should confirm the planetary systems have stabilized," she said. Ethan nodded, stepping beside her as she accessed the interface. The display shimmered, revealing a live feed of the planet below. The violent atmospheric disturbances had settled. The landmasses, which had begun shifting, had stilled. The once glowing reset sequence was now dark, inert. Ethan let out a slow breath. "We did it." Sari's shoulders relaxed, but only slightly. "The council will not be pleased." He glanced at her. "Yeah, well, let's add that to the long list of things I don't care about right now." A soft hum escaped her, a sound he was beginning to recognize as her version of amusement. Ethan exhaled, leaning against the control panel. The weight of everything finally caught up with him, exhaustion pulling at his limbs. His entire body ached, his mind felt stretched thin, but despite it all, a sense of undeniable relief settled in his chest. Then footsteps. Ethan tensed, his body reacting instinctively, but Sari didn't move. She already knew who it was. Commander Voss stepped into the chamber, their piercing gaze scanning the flickering displays before settling on Ethan and Sari. Their bioluminescence pulsed in unreadable patterns before they spoke. "You have done something irreversible." Sari met their gaze evenly. "We saved our people." Voss was silent for a moment, then exhaled. "And made powerful enemies in the process." Ethan snorted. "What else is new?" Voss's gaze shifted to him. "You are fortunate I did not report your actions before the system collapsed." Ethan tilted his head. "I'm feeling the gratitude." Sari's bioluminescence flared in irritation. "Enough." She turned back to Voss, her voice steady. "The council will be forced to acknowledge the truth now. The reset would have destroyed everything. They will not admit fault, but they will not attempt to use the key again." Voss considered her words, then nodded. "Perhaps, but you will not be welcomed back easily." Sari exhaled. "I know." Ethan frowned. "Wait, what does that mean?" Sari glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I defied the council's will. I acted against the wishes of my people." She turned back to Voss. "I will not remain where I am no longer trusted." Something heavy settled in Ethan's chest. "So what now?" Sari was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "I go where I am needed." Ethan studied her, feeling the weight behind her words. He had expected her to return to her people even after all of this. He had assumed she would have to answer for what she had done, but she was choosing to walk away. She was choosing something else. Voss's bioluminescence dimmed slightly. "Acceptance. Then take a ship and leave, before the council changes their mind." Sari nodded once, then turned to Ethan. He met her gaze, his throat tightening slightly. "You really planning to just leave?" Her expression softened. "You have been many things since I met you, Ethan Voss. A scientist, a liability." Her lips quirked slightly. "A survivor." He huffed a quiet laugh. "And you, what are you now?" She stepped closer, and for a brief moment her fingertips brushed against his, light, barely there but deliberate. "I am free." The word sent a strange warmth through him. Sari turned to Voss. "A vessel." Voss inclined their head. "There is one prepared. You will not be followed." Ethan took a slow breath, then turned to Sari. "I'm coming with you." She blinked, her bioluminescence flaring slightly in surprise. Voss let out something that sounded suspiciously like an exasperated sigh. "Of course you are." Sari tilted her head, watching Ethan carefully. "You are certain?" He gave her a crooked grin. "Let's be honest, I don't think I'm getting a ride home any other way." She studied him for a long moment, then exhaled softly. "Then come." And just like that, the decision was made. The universe was vast, unpredictable, dangerous. But in that moment, standing beside her, Ethan wasn't afraid. For the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And this time, he wasn't running. He was ready. The stolen vessel slipped through the dark expanse of space. its sleek frame cutting a silent path away from the core fleet. Ethan sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the distant glow of the warship shrink in the viewport. The stars stretched ahead of them, endless and unknown. Sari sat beside him, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the controls. The quiet hum of the ship filled the space between them, steady, rhythmic. Ethan exhaled. "So, now what?" Sari didn't immediately answer. Instead, she adjusted their trajectory, ensuring they remained off any tracking paths. Only when the course was locked did she finally glance at him. "You chose to come with me. It wasn't a question," Ethan smirked. "I figured you'd need someone around to keep things interesting." Her bioluminescence pulsed faintly. "You assume you will not be a liability." He placed a hand over his chest in mock offense. "I just helped save an entire planet." Sari hummed, her markings flickering, with much recklessness. "Yeah, well, worked, didn't it?" She turned her attention back to the controls, but there was no mistaking the subtle upward tilt of her lips. Ethan leaned back, letting the silence settle between them for a moment. The weight of everything, the danger, the near-death experiences, the sheer insanity of the past few days, should have left him drained. And yet he felt light, free. He turned his head, studying her in the dim glow of the cockpit. She wasn't what he had expected. He had met aliens before. He had studied their physiology, their worlds, their cultures. But Sari was different. She wasn't just another species to catalog, another mystery to analyze. She was her, a warrior who had defied her own people, a scholar who had questioned the knowledge she had been raised to accept, a survivor who had fought beside him, not because she had to, but because she had chosen to, and she had let him in. That part still floored him. Ethan swallowed, his voice quieter when he spoke again. "You ever think about where you'd go if you didn't have to answer to anyone?" Sari considered his words. "When I was young, I was told my path was set, that my duty would define me," she exhaled. "But duty is not purpose," Ethan nodded. "No, it's not." She glanced at him, her gaze unreadable. "And you, where will your purpose take you now?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Guess I'm still figuring that out." She studied him for a moment longer before returning her attention to the viewport. Ethan let his gaze drift forward as well. The galaxy was wide open now. No mission tethering him to an outpost. No command team treating him like a background scientist. No regrets holding him back, just this, just her. And somehow that was enough. Sari shifted, leaning back slightly in her chair, her fingers idly tapping against the console in thought. "I know of a system, unexplored, untouched." Ethan raised a brow. "Are you suggesting an adventure?" Her bioluminescence pulsed in slow, deliberate waves. "I am suggesting a choice." Ethan grinned, stretching his arms behind his head. "Well then, let's go see what's out there." Sari keyed in the coordinates. The ship hummed in response, the engines flaring to life. Ethan let out a slow breath as the stars blurred, the ship slipping into the unknown. No orders, no counsel, no expectations, just the open sky and the quiet rhythm of bioluminescent light beside him. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Voss wasn't just surviving. He was living.